just in Los Feliz with my friend Barry, and we've just had a serious accident.
Rest in peace, Daryl Sheets. Also, I know Daryl would want something positive out of this, so he had a guy like really tormenting him lately on cyberbullying. Guys, just because you watch us on television doesn't mean you know us.
Get ready to bid, because we're going to get ready to sell.
Are you ready?
Yeah. How about 300 and 300?
Join the gang and let the bidding begin.
This is why we do this.
The storage units were supposed to be the dangerous part of Storage Wars. Fans tuned in to watch abandoned lockers reveal hidden treasures, outrageous finds, and fierce bidding wars. But behind those auction doors, some of the show's biggest personalities were facing battles far more serious than anything they found inside a unit. Some died unexpectedly. Others found themselves caught in legal trouble. One nearly lost his life after a devastating health crisis. So, what really happened to the Storage Wars stars whose lives took shocking turns away from the cameras? Join us as we uncover the tragedies, scandals, and battles that fans never got to see. Dave Hester and the night the stroke almost won. Before Dave Hester nearly died in his bed, he spent several years making everyone in the Storage Wars world want to kill him on camera. That is not a criticism. That was the service he provided. Every good show needs a villain, someone whose wins feel like losses for the audience, whose confidence curdles just past competence into genuine arrogance, and whose relationship with the word "yoop"
Yeah.
Have you bought here before?
Yep. Yeah.
transforms a bidding confirmation into a personality statement. Dave was the best possible version of that character because it was not entirely a character. He was competitive to a degree that made social grace a secondary concern, and the camera loved him for it. He appeared on Storage Wars from Season 1, was fired following a lawsuit in which he alleged the show was staged and that producers were planting valuable items in storage units to generate better television, and returned in Season 5 after settling that suit. A sequence of events that generated enough industry conversation to fill its own story. Whether the lawsuit was right, tactical, or both remains unanswered. But the willingness to sue the hand that fed him says something about how seriously Dave Hester took his own position. In November 2018, everything changed. He woke up in the night to find himself unable to move properly, unable to process what was happening. His body was not responding the way it was supposed to. His girlfriend was there, and she immediately got him help. The incident made walking and other daily tasks difficult, so Dave had to undergo physical therapy to recover. A hemorrhagic stroke is the kind that happens when a blood vessel in the brain bleeds rather than simply blocking. It is more dangerous, often more damaging, and less predictable in its recovery trajectory than its ischemic counterpart. The fact that his girlfriend was there is not a minor detail. People who suffer hemorrhagic strokes alone at home sometimes do not survive the time it takes to get help. And the window between the stroke beginning and medical intervention is critical in ways that make the presence or absence of another person genuinely consequential. He survived. He went through physical therapy to rebuild the capacities the stroke had disrupted. He came back to the show. The man who had spent years being the person everyone else on the show was rooting against returned from a medical emergency that had genuinely threatened his life. And the audience that had loved hating him found something more complicated in the returning version. A person who had looked at the actual end of things and kept going anyway. Dave was not the only Storage Wars personality whose body made its own dramatic announcement in 2019. That year was catastrophic for the show's cast in a way that no production schedule had anticipated. Daryl Sheets and the end nobody planned for. Daryl Sheets was the gambler, the nickname given to him by the show's producers to capture the way he approached storage auctions, with the risk tolerance of someone who had absorbed enough losses to stop fearing the next one. He was always willing to spend big on a unit that felt right to him, even when the evidence was limited. Often he was wrong. The camera documented that honestly, and the audience liked him for it. He was warm in the way that people who are genuinely comfortable with losing can afford to be warm, because they have made peace with the downside and can therefore be fully present for the upside when it arrives. In March 2019, Daryl Sheets was at a Justin Timberlake concert in Los Angeles when he began experiencing the symptoms of a heart attack. He was hospitalized, and in a series of Instagram posts that captured both his personality and his specific brand of self-deprecating good humor, he updated his fans on his condition, at one point joking that he had at least made part of the show. He also revealed he had been feeling ill for months before the concert, and that tests following the heart attack also discovered a lung infection that had been developing alongside the cardiac problem. The casual reveal that he had been feeling ill for months before the event landed, with a weight for fans who had been watching him on screen during that same period, apparently healthy, apparently engaged, the same Daryl Sheets they had always known. The private experience and the public presentation had been running on parallel tracks, and the concert was where they finally collided in a way that could not be managed into invisibility. Unfortunately, that was the beginning of the end. On April 22, 2026, Daryl's life came to a tragic end at his Arizona home. Authorities confirmed that he had died by self-harm, but the investigation soon raised another troubling question. Had online harassment played a role in the events leading up to his death? According to an incident report that was obtained, police discovered a handwritten note referencing Facebook bullying. Investigators subsequently spoke with a man allegedly connected to the harassment. He denied involvement and told officers he had been receiving threats himself. Police also interviewed Daryl's girlfriend, who described him as deeply upset during his final hours. She said he had recently been dealing with accusations, family conflict, and what she described as problems involving a man who had been allegedly slandering his name. She also recalled that Daryl had been struggling with sleep and appeared increasingly stressed. Authorities did not establish that the alleged cyberbullying caused Daryl Sheets' death, but the allegations became an important part of the investigation. After his death, former castmates remembered a very different side of him. Brandy Passante expressed sympathy and reminded struggling people that they are not alone. Renee Njoda described him as a hardworking man who cared deeply about his family. Daryl left the auction world with memories worth far more than anything he ever found in a storage unit. Then there was Barry Weiss, a man who entered the same auctions with an entirely different advantage. He wasn't trying to build a fortune. He already had one. He was there because he loved the hunt, and because he never knew what bizarre treasure might be waiting for him. Barry Weiss and the crash that ended more than the ride. Barry Weiss was the collector, and the title suited him in every possible sense of the word. He was not primarily a storage auction bidder in the conventional sense. He was a wealthy man for whom the auction was an excuse to be somewhere interesting and to potentially find something extraordinary to add to a collection of cars, motorcycles, and antiques that had been assembled over decades of considerable financial success. He ran a produce empire before the show existed and was already rich when the cameras found him. He brought to every auction the specific, unhurried quality of someone who can afford to lose, which, in practice, translated into a screen presence more relaxed and eccentric than anyone else in the regular cast. In April 2019, Barry and a friend were riding motorcycles when a car driver allegedly ran into them while attempting to exit a parking lot. The crash sent him to the hospital with multiple injuries, including back and femur damage serious enough to require surgery. He underwent physical therapy in the months that followed, the kind of slow rebuilding that motorcycle accidents tend to require. Not just healing the broken things, but relearning the confidence in a body that had just demonstrated its vulnerability in the most direct possible way. He came back to Storage Wars and was out for seasons 5 through 13 anyway. He had left the show following season 4 to pursue his own spin-off, Buried Treasure, and the recovery from the accident intersected with a period when his relationship with the main show was already in transition. But his return to the cast in season 14 was accompanied by the knowledge among his audience that the eccentric, motorcycle-obsessed collector they were watching had nearly been taken off the road permanently by someone trying to exit a parking lot. Barry Weiss's injury was the kind of story that arrives without warning and leaves with its lesson delivered. But while his story ended with an unexpected injury, Jared and Brandy's story was only beginning to change. The Young Guns became after the show. For most of Storage Wars' first decade on air, Jared Schultz and Brandy Passanti were the show's love story. Not in a sentimental, deliberately manufactured way. The show was not that kind of production, but in the way that two people who are genuinely together generate warmth between them that a camera cannot fake. They were the Young Guns, the youngest bidders in the regular cast, operating on smaller margins than their competitors, scrapping for units that the bigger players dismissed, and presenting, while doing all of it, the specific chemistry of two people who genuinely liked each other and liked being in the same room. They appeared on all 12 seasons as a couple. They got their own spin-off, Brandy and Jared. Married to the Job, in 2014, 8 episodes built around their lives and businesses, the kind of production that only happens when a network believes in the longevity of what it is looking at. Their children, Cameron and Peyton, appeared in the show's orbit. They were, by every visible measure, a family that had been built inside a storage auction and was going to keep growing there. They separated in November 2018 at the end of the filming of season 12. Brandy revealed it publicly in the season 13 premiere in April 2021, telling the camera simply, "I'm not with Jared anymore." They had never actually married, despite frequently presenting as husband and wife, both on the show and to the public. They had 2 kids and 12 seasons and a spin-off and years of shared life. And then they had this, a premiere episode announcement and separate auction appearances going forward. 3 weeks after the season 13 premiere, on April 30th, 2021, Brandy Passanti was at a bar in Lake Forest, Orange County, with a group of friends when Jared Schultz arrived. What happened next was witnessed by the people around them and captured in a police report. The conversation escalated. Brandy told him to leave, but Jared allegedly pushed Brandy twice while yelling at her and her group. Police were called. By the time they arrived, Jared had left the bar. He spoke to officers a few days later and denied ever touching her. The Orange County District Attorney's Office charged him with 1 count of misdemeanor domestic violence battery. A&E launched an internal investigation to determine what his future on the show would be. He had a prior legal history that context made relevant. A 2019 resisting an officer charge from an incident in Lake Forest, and older criminal history that a source once described to Reality Weekly as a dark period tied to drugs that had been a wake-up call. The image of the Young Guns, the couple the audience had watched for 12 seasons, the relationship they had assumed was going to keep going the way it always had, was over. Not gradually or with a dignified mutual announcement, but with a bar confrontation and a criminal charge and a network investigation and a domestic violence allegation from the woman the show had always placed beside him as his partner. Brandy Passante kept going. She returned to the show independently, bidding on her own, building her own identity separate from the partnership that had defined her television presence for over a decade. The audience received her separately, in a way that suggested the years of watching had produced genuine investment in her as a person rather than just as half of a couple. Jared Schultz's relationship with the show became uncertain in ways that were never cleanly resolved in public. After leaving Storage Wars, Jared largely stepped away from the television spotlight and kept his life away from the cameras relatively private. His life away from the cameras became considerably quieter. While he occasionally remained connected to the Storage Wars universe and hinted at a possible return, Jared largely kept his personal life private. The auctions continued without him, leaving fans to wonder whether the former young gun had finally closed the door on reality television for good. But Jared wasn't the only Storage Wars star whose story took a dark turn after the cameras stopped rolling. Mark Bolello's story was far more tragic and far more sudden. Mark Bolello, the 2 days between an arrest and a goodbye. Mark Bolello walked into storage auctions like he was walking onto a runway. He called himself Rico Suave, a nickname his fellow bidders gave him, and one he wore without a hint of self-consciousness, because a man showing up to a storage facility in Oxnard with $50,000 cash, in a Merce, and an outfit that belonged at a gallery opening rather than at a parking lot auction had earned the right to own the name. He drove his competitors crazy in the way that people who spend money like water drive people who count every dollar crazy, bidding things to numbers that made no financial sense, daring anyone to follow him to territory that turned an auction into an act of ego rather than commerce. He appeared on Storage Wars from Season 2 through Season 4, and in that span built a following among fans who found his combination of flashy presentation and genuine competitive instinct irresistible to watch. He ran multiple businesses: Bolello Auctions, a liquidation company, a wholesale and distribution operation, and a gaming store called The Game Exchange. He had the kind of energy that makes everything around it feel more alive, which is exactly what reality television requires from its most compelling cast members. He also returned a stolen 1938 Action Comics issue, the one featuring Superman's first appearance, worth approximately $1 million, to its owner, Nicolas Cage, in 2011, a detail that said something genuinely decent about who he was underneath the showmanship. It wasn't his first time in trouble with the law, as he served 60 days in jail in 2009 for 3 drug-related felonies and 45 days in jail in 2011 for violating probation. These facts were known. They did not define the public conversation about him while the show was running, because the show was not interested in that part of the story. And the audience watching him outbid Dave Hester with a grin was not looking for complexity. He was entertainment. He was Rico Suave. He was the guy who showed up with too much money and too much confidence and made everyone else feel slightly underdressed. In February 2013, he was arrested on suspicion of being under the influence of a controlled substance and minor drug possession. He was released from custody. 2 days later, his dead body was found inside his car, and the Ventura County Medical Examiner confirmed suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning, asphyxiation, in the car, alone. 2 days. Between the arrest and the end of his life, 2 days passed. The man who had been the loudest presence in every auction he attended, who had $50,000 in a Merce and a wardrobe full of things that caught the light, was gone at 40 in the most quiet and private way imaginable. Storage Wars paid tribute to him in the show. The fan community grieved in the way that television audiences grieve people who felt familiar. The grief of losing someone you watched without ever meeting, whose absence changes the texture of something you watched regularly. The show kept going after these tragic deaths and accidents. Interestingly, it is still running till date. The auctions are still happening. The units are still full of things nobody expected. And the cast that has moved through the show across its long run has left behind a record that is not just about treasure hunting. It is about the full range of what happens to people when television finds them, makes them famous, and then keeps rolling while everything else continues to unfold in the real world just outside the frame. Which Storage Wars star had the most heartbreaking story? And whose life changed the most after leaving the show? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.